Today on Locked On Phoenix Suns, news galore about the Suns roster. Two players who might opt out, one player who might become a Sun in the draft, one who certainly won't, and somehow they're all the right decisions? Let's go.
You are Locked On Suns, your daily Phoenix Suns podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
And we're back. This is Locked On Phoenix Suns, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm Brendon Kleen, your host, a credentialed media member covering the Suns for the past 7 seasons and the host of the Just Basketball Show, wherever you get your podcasts. Welcome. Thank you for making us your first listen to kick off your Friday. I was going to say we're close to 4th of July. That's just lying. We're not quite there yet, but we're nearing the holidays. It's hot. I appreciate you spending your Friday with me, regardless, on your way to work, on your way to practice for a kid, on your way to the gym, at the gym, wherever you are, whenever you are. Thank you for being here. Hit follow or subscribe if you haven't already. Become an everydayer. We got episodes for you Monday through Friday, all off season and beyond. Hit that button, get an episode in your feed Monday through Friday. Get locked onto the Phoenix Suns all off season long. And we got news, as promised, as planned for, as hoped. The Suns are keeping themselves in the headlines. Today's episode brought to you by PrizePicks, the easiest, most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA. Use the code LockedOnNBA when you do to get a first deposit match up to $100. We'll hear more from them later on in the show, but let's get to a few different reports from John Gambadoro here locally that provide some clarity about where the Suns are going to be this offseason, both with what's going on with their roster and next Thursday's NBA draft. So, all right, let's start with the biggest news, in my opinion, because it's the most concrete. So it started on Thursday morning when Kelly Iko from The Athletic, who covered the Houston Rockets, when Eric Gordon was there, still covers the Rockets, reported that it was kind of on the fence, 50-50 as to whether Gordon would be opting in or out for this upcoming season here in Phoenix. Of course, the ball is in his court because last offseason, in order to get him and some of these other players, one of whom we'll talk about next in the next segment, the Suns had to go out and do those options, basically, right? It became a way for them to guarantee more money for some of these players than just the $2-3 million that they were going to be eligible to earn in year one if it was just a one-year contract. If you remember, part of the good aspect of that from a Sun standpoint was Matt Ishbia's willingness to spend. Those contracts that go beyond 1 year on the minimum are not subsidized by the NBA, meaning Ishbia and the Suns had to pay for those rather than for most teams. They're just kind of empty cap spots. They're just placeholders. The league pays that money. The Suns went out of their way to not do that, again, to have a little bit of a better offer. Seemingly, that is not enough to keep Gordon. Eric Gordon last season was probably the top free agent the Suns got in all of their minimum recruits, but he averaged 11 points, 2 rebounds, 2 assists per game, shot 38% from 3, got to the line less than 1 time per game. Now, per game stats take or leave, 44% from the field because most of his shots were threes, gives you an efficiency of a 58 true shooting, a little bit over league average, but you look at the advanced stats, something like box plus minus, he was a negative on both ends of the court according to that metric. I wouldn't say Gordon's season was some kind of monumental failure for the Suns, but that brings us to the other news, right, where John Gambadoro goes on to say that he expects Gordon not to be back and kind of squashes the uncertainty altogether and just puts some certainty to it there. So for all intents and purposes, Gordon will not be his Sun next year. Again, not a failure of a season, but I think a few things worked against him, and a few things make me totally fine with the idea that he will not be part of this team going forward. One of them is that they went out and ended up getting Grayson Allen in the DeAndre Ayton / Damian Lillard trade. Now, it's a little interesting there, right? Because that created this logjam even beyond what the Suns already were dealing with, where Booker and Beal already have some overlap that the Suns are still figuring out how to work around. Gordon kind of added to that, although you would have hoped, defensively, his ability to guard bigger players, maybe he could be that other wing alongside Kevin Durant in some of their closing lineups. That never really came to pass. His defense, especially on the ball, especially against more athletic, younger players, he just wasn't able to defend kind of those guys in space and stay in front of them. He wasn't really, forcing turnover. He just sort of, a vet who didn't make a bunch of huge rotation mistakes, which were a problem for the Suns. So that's probably why his defensive numbers look a little even better than his offensive ones, frankly, advanced stat-wise. All of that did not work out. Then you add the Grayson Allen component. That creates even more overlap. Another option to just slot right into that opening. And it became Allen, who, just because his offense was so good, his defense was, frankly, probably better than Gordon's, all things considered, in total. And I would say that, there was this discussion throughout the season, especially after they started to get healthy, of, I think it was Chris Haynes who reported that Gordon wasn't pleased with his role. He went on JJ Redick's podcast and kind of talked much more about the opportunity, getting to play alongside great players and everything else, but you could say that he wasn't featured enough or didn't get enough shots. I mean, frankly, I just don't think his offensive output and performance was good enough to really earn that. Also, how do you feature somebody who's not really a guy who runs off screens and creates open three-pointers that way, like, JJ Redick or Cam Johnson would, but 64% of his shots were threes. So how do you even feature a player like that? And to make matters worse, especially come playoff time, he was hesitating. He wasn't taking shots, even those open catch-and-shoot threes that were there. So it just didn't work out. The Suns have better options. There's a lot of overlap with the skill set that Gordon provides, and if the ability to kind of get downhill and finish at the basket, the ability to defend bigger players, if that stuff's not there either, there really does not seem to be much value. Now, look, Gordon has been a guy who has fluctuated a lot based on the circumstances around him, I would say, and how physically healthy he is. He's going to be 36 next season, so that's another reason to maybe not bet on a bounce back, but he could go somewhere else and have a better season. It wouldn't shock me. But for the Suns, even the best version of what Gordon provides at this point is probably just not worth the minutes you're going to have to give a veteran like that and somebody who does a lot of the same things as your best players. So if Gambo's onto something here and that is where this goes, he opts out, he goes to another team. It made sense. It was worth the pursuit. It was worth signing him. I think there's maybe a world in which it goes better, but the Suns have a lot of opportunities to improve the roster this upcoming offseason, even if it's just bringing somebody younger into that slot who does some of the things that the Suns roster is really desperate for. It's probably best for both sides. One move that was not so certain was Drew Eubanks. What was he going to do with his option? How did he feel about testing the market after one season with Phoenix? It appears he will not be back either. I will tell you why that flip from what he had been saying earlier in the offseason really sets up the Suns to take a step forward with the rotation. Coming up next. First, today's show brought to you by PrizePicks, America's #1 daily fantasy sports app with over 5 million active users. You can now win up to 100 times your money on PrizePicks with as few as 4 correct picks, turning $10 into $1,000 like that. If you're looking for promotions, PrizePicks has lowered stat projections on Tuesdays to help your lineup hit, or returned entry fees if you lose every Friday. PrizePicks is available in more than 30 states across the country and all summer long with a variety of sports. Baseball, of course, but women's basketball is still heating up with Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese joining the fray to take on the likes of Brianna Stewart and Asia Wilson, the perennial MVPs here in the league. What I love about PrizePicks is that it is not just one head-to-head matchup or a pool or a league you're in. You just go against the PrizePicks player projections. You say more Caitlin Clark threes. You say more Asia Wilson rebounds. That can be your whole lineup, turning $10, of course, into $1,000. Download the PrizePicks app today. Use the code LOCKEDONNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. That's code LOCKEDONNBA at PrizePicks for a first deposit match up to $100. PrizePicks. Pick more, pick less. It's that easy. All right, so the other news of the day from John Gambadoro, all the news on this episode is from Gambo, but Drew Eubanks reportedly likely to opt out as well. That was, the Gordon thing was from Gambo on Twitter. This was from Gambo on Burns and Gambo, the radio show that he does here, of course, locally. And that's a change of tune from Eubanks, right? Who earlier in the offseason, right away, basically, I think the interview might have come like in April or within a couple weeks of the Suns being eliminated by the Minnesota Timberwolves. And Eubanks told Dwayne Rankin of the Arizona Republic back then that he wanted to be back. He expected and believed that the Suns wanted him back. And that was sort of where we left things. I thought that was a little bit interesting back then, and I didn't really talk about it as a whole thing here on the show, kind of for that reason, because one, it didn't really pass the smell test that Eubanks, or I guess that the Suns would want Eubanks. I mean, he had not played well in the playoffs. He had been very up and down throughout the regular season, mostly down, making mental lapses on defense constantly, earning the ire in particular of Kevin Durant on that end. How many times did we see Durant kind of exasperated after Eubanks made a mistake, either, allowing a rebound, not making that kind of second help effort as a rim protector, botching a switch or a pick and roll coverage? It didn't go well. On top of that, his offensive game proved to be incredibly limited, where he was, if the ball was in his hands outside of 2 seconds to give a dribble handoff to somebody, he panicked, he would turn it over, he could not dribble at all. He wasn't a post-up threat. He did not have a jumper, of course, and so unless he was catching the ball right at the basket and finishing, it wasn't really workable. And then there's the fact that, of course, from the very beginning, I was never a big believer in Eubanks because of his size. It's not that I don't think any smaller players, as far as centers go, can ever succeed. I mean, there's countless examples. I'm not comparing him to Draymond Green, but of course Draymond Green being an easy one there. But at 6'9", and the Suns already being undersized, it just felt like a big ask to expect that the Suns could build enough 1 through 5 size in lineups where Eubanks was on the court to compete with the best of the best in the NBA. So from the beginning on through all the way down to the end, it did not go well. It was not a good match. Considering they tampered for this guy and they're losing their second round pick this year and signed him on day one, it was just a whiff. I mean, they clearly thought he was primed to take a leap forward in his career as one of the mid-prime veterans that they targeted, and it just did not work. His block rate went down, his assist rate went down, his turnover rate went way up. Ugly season, all right? So, I'm assuming maybe Eubanks just spoke a little too soon, maybe took some of the positivity and good-natured conversations that happened at exit interviews or whatever to mean that he was coming back. The ball is in his court. He has a player option, but I would imagine that somewhere along the line it was communicated to him, hey, you're not guaranteed to be our backup center. We're going to be exploring other bigs. if you opt in, you'll be competing for a job and minutes, and you might not be part of our plans. At that point, considering he's only 26, going on 27, this is a minimum contract at the end of the day. I'm sure he realized, hey, it's probably not best for me to go back, and my value, even if I'm getting guaranteed money, my value is going to take a hit if I'm not even playing. I would imagine he can hop on a roster as a second or third big somewhere, maybe a worse team that's not counting on him so much to be, a championship component. But that's kind of what I think happened, not to mention that Mike Budenholzer has historically, you kind of either need to be a switch defender or a big-bodied drop defender, and you got to have some level of skill or shooting ability on the offensive end to cut it with Mike Budenholzer. He's never really played a big like Eubanks consistently in his career, so I'm sure that had something to do with it. Regardless, here we are now. The Suns are not going to have Eubanks on their roster, most likely, according to Gambo. My last thoughts on this, outside of just, it's for the best. The Suns are going to be better off, I think, with a different backup big. Almost, I don't want to speak too soon. We'll get to a couple things in the draft here to close the show. There are bigs in the NBA world worse than Eubanks. I'm not trying to say he's just the worst of the worst, but definitely somebody who fits better, and definitely they should be able to find a better player. Even if it means, frankly, this was the other thing about Eubanks, is they put themselves in a hole by not having another option, And so maybe if Eubanks kind of started the season out of the rotation and learned the system defensively, especially a little bit better, maybe it goes. So I even think like having Metu basically be the only other big man, and then Bol, of course, really, really screwed the Suns too. So I would hope that this year part of the solution beyond Eubanks, even if they keep Nurkic, is get a bunch of guys in there. Get 3 or 4 traditional real centers. Maybe Bol is one of them as an option, but don't pigeonhole yourself given that you're paying these guys minimums. They're uncertain by nature. You have Gordon, who was older and clearly, kind of breaking down as far as not being at his peak. And then you have Eubanks, who was a kind of a wild card, being smaller and coming over from a not winning environment. So mix it up, But the other thing is, it just tells us that I think, the Suns understand center is a spot. I know, again, it's a player option. The Suns are not making this decision, but I'm assuming they expressed their intentions and kind of forced their hand here, and that's good news because, again, they need size desperately. I don't see a lot of pathways this offseason where their main players 1 through 4 get, maybe they can add one more winger forward who's playable. Obviously, having O'Neal for the full season would help, but they're 1 through 4. If they're keeping Grayson at least through October, which is hard to make trades at that point anyway, and, their stars are their stars. If you're not going to be big 1 through 4, or at least not huge 1 through 4, you got to be huge at the 5, and Eubanks is not that. So that's a good signal that we're seeing some progress. I'm not saying it has to be an athlete, a rim runner. There's all sorts of ways you can skin the cat there, and Bud has had more, spacing, drop big men, not just, the 7'3" wingspan leaping guys. So there's all sorts of ways. I don't think Eubanks was the way. That's where I'll leave it. All right, what could be the way? Yves Missi from Baylor, and apparently not a much different kind of big from Duke. We'll break down what Gambo had to say about who the Suns are and are not targeting in next week's NBA draft, coming up next. First, today's show brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. When you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role, which is why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs, which has the tools to find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. LinkedIn is not just another job board. It has a vast network of users, more than 1 billion, making it the best place to hire. It gives you access to those professionals that you can't find anywhere else, all while making the process easy and intuitive. Hiring is easy when you have so many quality candidates. So easy, in fact, that 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. I've told you, I have the job that I have today because of LinkedIn, found the posting, knew that I was qualified, knew that the compensation was what I needed to make the move, and was able to contact the hiring manager and set up an interview all from the LinkedIn platform. So post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNBA. Become one of the 2.5 million small businesses using LinkedIn for hiring. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNBA to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. All right, let's close it out. So last but not least, as Gambo is on working overtime here, this time of year from a Suns standpoint, he every year tends to rule out players who are being linked to the Suns, and he will establish, as he does for the NFL draft, his top 5 kind of players in the mix for the pick. So today on the radio show, he said Kyle Filipowski from Duke, who is more of a, toolsy skill kind of center sophomore. So, you could have thought, the Suns tend to target older players. We know they want somebody who has a good chance to contribute earlier on in their career. Maybe he would have made sense. He shot 35% from 3 this past season on 3 attempts per game. Some of the components that make some sense, right? Brook Lopez, obviously the most recent big man that Bud coached. You can go Al Horford. You can go Sandro Mamukelashvili. You can go Paul Millsap, Pero Antic, on down the line. But no. Instead, Yves Missi, who, like I said with Eubanks, would be a different type of big man for Bud. Now, I want to say, Yves Missi, freshman from Baylor, just, measurables stuff is off the charts. 6'10", blocked a shot and a half per game, had a block percentage of 7.3, which is very, very good. I just want to say, 7'6" wingspan, which is just absurd. Made what percentage of his twos? 61, and is a decent enough free throw shooter. A lot of good stuff, and he's just a freshman, so room to get better. Highly touted player, dating back even to high school, moved to California and went to Prolific Prep, which is a big breeding ground for players. So a lot of good stuff, a lot of things to like. I'll just go back to the Bud side of things because I don't want to overhype or overharp on that. One, the league has changed a lot, right? Bud started coaching the Hawks in a very different era of NBA basketball where that kind of 5-out stuff was, if you could do it, if you could pull it off, if you could have an Al Horford. Well, the Celtics just won a championship with Al Horford doing much of the same thing, but back then it was like a cheat code. You could have a huge advantage just by playing the game and playing the math correctly. So in Milwaukee, Bobby Portis it doesn't super fit into the mold necessarily. Maybe he's kind of like Millsap, I guess you could say, but Giannis, of course, was the center for a lot of lineups that Bud played, and they would go to him as a 5 with Portis a lot. And Giannis is basically an Yves Missi who can dribble and shoot and score. So, let's not box Coach Bud in too much. That said, one thing that is interesting to me about Gambo kind of saying this that Missi might be in play. I don't believe he said that Missi worked out for the Suns. I listened back to the segment, and he did say that Filipowski did not work out for the Suns, which is part of why he felt comfortable ruling him out. He also said that the skill set overlap was a little bit too much with Nurkic and that they want some of that diversity of style. So Missi makes sense from all that standpoint. It's just surprising that they would consider a raw freshman. That just really hasn't tracked with the way that they've gone ever. Since basically, honestly, Ayton I wouldn't have called raw. So, when's the last time the Suns took a raw freshman? Probably 2017 with Josh Jackson, right? So, and that was James Jones did not work for the team, or maybe had just gotten hired. Either way, different regime, different ownership, different everything. The Suns have not targeted players like this much. Even last year, I keep saying that phrase, mid-prime veteran. The Suns did not go after the undrafted free agent who got cut loose by his team who's trying to catch on somewhere, or the, second draft guys that are, have their options turned down by their team and are on the outs. The Suns went for guys who had been in the league 3, 4, 5 seasons, but had never been on good teams before. The Keita Bates-Diops and the Drew Eubanks and the Chimezie Metus out there. Yuta Watanabe, of course. So even then, the Suns did not go young, raw, high upside. So I think Missi, with the fact that he can make his free throws, the fact that he, has the shot blocking and everything else, like, I wouldn't say he's some kind of low floor player, but the learning curve is steep. And it's no sure thing that Missi hits it all, but even more so would be able to contribute in year one. So just fascinating kind of to consider who might be in play and what that kind of tells us, not only about the Suns' draft approach heading into Thursday of next week, but just generally their roster building approach. This is a front office that's starting to look quite different. They have never invested a lot in scouting, as we know, but between President Josh Bartelstein's very clear involvement in things nowadays, multiple new front office people hired, including one from college who just coached at the University of South Florida, in addition to some cap people and everything else, who is kind of influencing the player evaluations and personnel scouting and all that and this draft process at this point in time. I don't think we know for sure. And so we know what the draft has been and how the Suns have looked at it, but I'm not saying that Missi being considered at all is some sort of new approach altogether, but I think that I'm keeping my eye on it at the very least. And if the Suns were to pick him or anybody like this, a young, raw, athletic prospect at any position, frankly, it would be a big change. So we'll see. Only a week to go, but something to think about. That'll wrap us up for the week. Brandon Duenas back Monday. I'll have Zach Cohen of Real GM, who breaks down the draft for them. Also happens to be a Phoenix resident who is a Suns fan. So who better to talk through the draft with than him? Steven Perjone will drop by to talk through the latest in Suns land. Maybe on Wednesday's recording for Thursday's show, draft day, or maybe Steven can just help me break down who the Suns pick on Thursday. We'll see. But hit follow, hit subscribe. Get all those episodes in your feed next week as the draft arrives. Enjoy your weekend, and I'll catch you guys then.